So, welcome back everyone to the third part of our Helmholtz Information and Data Science Virtual Career Day. It's a pleasure to have all of you back for the last two sessions. For those logging in just right now for the first time, my name is Andreas. I'm the head of the Helmholtz Information and Data Science Academy, which is hosting this very nice event to give you a little glimpse into the career opportunities in the vast Helmholtz universe. We started the day with energy, with Earth aeronautics and space, with health, and now I'm very glad that we have one of our most prestigious applicators of artificial intelligence and health, Uwe Ohler, with us. Uwe, it's great to have you here and have your talk about your personal career in data science and research field health. Stage is yours.
Thank you and welcome everybody. I hope I can tell you a few things about how people actually got into data science when this term didn't even exist yet, and how you actually end up doing research in this particular area. So just about myself, that I set the stage a bit before we get into this. I'm a professor at the Max Delbrueck Center, which is one of the Helmholtz institutes in Germany that's focusing on molecular medicine, on systemic diseases that affect the human body, and I'm also a professor then adjunct at Humboldt University, both in biology and in computer science. And I lead a research group at this institute. I advise about 20 people or so, half of them students, half of them more senior researchers. We do work at the interface of molecular biology, genomics, and computer science, and specifically applying machine learning to understand what's actually hidden in the genome. And so my lab actually contains both a wet and a dry part. So we really do both the applied part of data science really ourselves, not just working with experts. We actually do this personally. I have held pipettes in my hands occasionally, not too often, but I have. But I also have coded way more for sure than I have ever done experiments in the lab. And so this is roughly the setup that I do. I'm also the director or co-director of one of the Helmholtz of the HIDA graduate programs, the one that started in Berlin, and we're now already recruited our third cohort of students that's starting very soon. And the first papers of the students that started 2 years ago are now coming out. So that's also great to see. So how did I get here? And I figured I could tell you, if you look at my CV, you'll see things that look fairly straightforward, let's put it this way, right? So I graduated from high school with 17, actually. I started college when I was 17. I got a really nice PhD fellowship from the Boehringer Ingelheim Foundation. That's a pharmaceutical foundation that actually was very early on supporting computer scientists and mathematicians. We're talking back in the 90s, and I was one of the first people sort of in the mid-late 90s to really start applying machine learning to genomics. And then I ended up at UC Berkeley with a co-advisor. That doesn't sound too bad either. I did a postdoc at MIT. That sounds maybe even better. And then I was faculty at Duke University, which may not be as known, but is actually one of the top 10 places in the US. And so I was a professor by the age of 31. And then I had a permanent position by 37, and I was back in Germany on the highest level before I even turned 40. So now that sounds actually really straightforward, right? But of course, the truth is a bit different, and so this is when I'm starting to show a little bit if that actually works. I hope you see now slides. Maybe Andreas can tell me if that works. Does that work?
Yeah, I can see your screen. You can go on presentation, I think.
Yeah, okay, now you see a white screen. Okay,
perfect.
So let me take you a little bit more through how I actually got there. Yeah, because that's a really different story. And so I grew up partially in Austria. I'm German, but I grew up in Austria in this actually nice place here. This is a high school where I started when I was about 10. And in Austria, the school system is actually quite rigid. And so the things I could take from there is that I got a really solid math education. We were sort of really beaten to death with good math, actually. When I started college, I realized I knew what an integral was, and I could solve pretty complicated equations there, and I could do Gaussian elimination and all of these things, and a lot of the other students actually hadn't done this. So for data science, I think the really important part is that you have solid math. And of course, solid math you only get if you really have supportive teachers, because for some people, that's not the most exciting topic. But I myself find statistics a bit boring. Don't tell anyone. Some parts of statistics, I should say. Statistics is super important. And of course, it's an important part in data science, and you can do lots of great things in it. But it's a very personal thing, and it's influenced heavily by your teachers, what you get excited about. And I really could take this, you know, anything can be interesting if it's taught well. And that's something that you have to aspire later on in your life when you suddenly fill the role of a teacher and you see how that's going with your kids. Right now, if you saw this thing ever in the news recently, it was the first school that had to shut down again because of Corona in the whole country of Austria. Yay. That's why you might have seen this picture if you had any exposure to Austrian news recently. All right. So I graduated early from high school, actually, because I moved between different countries and actually skipped one grade at the time. And also in Austria, the school's shorter. So, and you know, it looks really impressive if a guy finishes high school with 17, when in Germany, normal time was 19. But that doesn't mean it was a genius. It was actually just the circumstances around moving between different countries that can lead to delays. And in my case, luckily, just led to speed ups, right? So first myth in the CV debunked. All right. So then I went to this place, which is Universität Erlangen-Nürnberg, which also might not be one of the best known universities. It's actually quite large university in Bavaria. It belongs to Nuremberg because Nuremberg didn't want to have a university. It was such a rich town in the Middle Ages that the wealthy citizens of the city didn't want these loud and rowdy students littering their streets, and so they put the university in the little town next to Nuremberg, which is Erlangen here. The picture on the left is what they show you in the, you know, fancy flyers. On the right is where I actually worked, and the left building I only saw for registration, but hey, this is what sometimes things look like. What was interesting about this place, I actually got sent there because Germany distributed students across different places at the time. So you couldn't choose necessarily where you went to study, but you could pick preferences. And one thing that I was always interested in is not just having math. I liked math, but I wanted to apply this. And when I looked for which program to enroll in college, I actually wanted to do something with math, and this is how I ended up with computer science, essentially as a kind of applied math. I also had a C64 at home and played video games, but it's a different story. And in fact, not relevant for computer science, right? Because computer science was math and also a little bit of computer science. And you do need for data science a really solid foundation, and I think this is what I got there. At the time, this was actually the second largest computer science faculty school in Germany. It's changed a bit in the meantime, but that was why this was a good place, because it had everything represented. And so I did have courses in what was called pattern recognition early on, and realized that it was a bit different from what at the time was called artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence at the time was really very logic, expert systems, deduction driven, and not so much data driven. This has changed a lot, and at the time these were more or less two different subfields. And what's now called machine learning was called pattern recognition, and they had great research going on there. And so I was lucky to get into a place where I had great research in machine learning and other aspects of data science, and I could explore different application fields. I had biology as a minor right away because I was always interested in biology, and this is how I got into bioinformatics research. But I also, for instance, started with musicology until I realized that this was really far from data. You know, now with Spotify and whatnot, you can do great stuff with data science and music. In the 90s, not so much. You could probably write software for keyboards or something. So I realized biology was actually quite interesting and much more closer and more realistic to actually get data. At the time, there wasn't much. There was just about enough to get working in this field. And so after Erlangen, I actually, this is the Technical University Berlin. I did not actually study there, but I had an account at a computer there with an internet connection, which in 1997 wasn't really, you know, everyday home, because where I worked was actually literally next door. Computer science at the time was number 27 in the street. 27A was a homeless shelter where I did my national service for a year. I do bring this up. The guy in the middle actually is still the director of this homeless shelter. He was my boss at the time, and I really learned a lot there as well. Namely, two things: to be actually respectful to different people from different backgrounds, no matter what their situation is, and that's handy anywhere, not just in data science, but also that you can get a lot, maybe not anything, but a lot done if you're motivated. It's because I actually wrote my application for my PhD fellowship during night shifts in 2 weeks in this homeless shelter. After people went to bed, I had lots of free time. I had gone to the computer science department next door to print out the new literature and actually looked at places where bioinformatics, where applied machine learning was taking place. And that's where by chance, these two buildings were right next to each other. And so I could combine the social work that I did instead of my military service with actually preparing for grad school. Things come together in strange ways. One fun side note was that the foundation that I applied for usually interviewed people at their workplace because they wanted to check out, the lab situation and how were people behaving in their environment. And I told the director of this foundation, sure, you can come and visit me here and I'll give you a bowl of soup that we make, but that might not be what you quite expect to see when you visit your typical applicants. So he actually met me in the hotel bar and drank quite a few glasses of wine while I was trying to convince him that as an aspiring data scientist at the time, I was useful for biologists, and no, we weren't just putting complicated theoretical models together, but that pattern recognition, my background at the time, was really about finding practical solutions with data at hand for automatic reasoning and so forth. And so, apparently I succeeded because I got this fellowship, and that's brought me part to UC Berkeley, where my co-advisor in biology then was. And that got me connections to do my postdoc at MIT, right? So if this guy in the homeless shelter, or who visited me in the homeless shelter, this director of the foundation would not have been convinced my pitch why data science would be interesting, I would have gone to these places. I did not apply at these schools. This was by connection through the foundation who said, we like your application, but you do need to go to different places where people already have data and work with the people that at the time worked on the first genome projects in Berkeley. It was the Fruit Fly Genome Project. And really get in there and actually work with data, get your hands dirty, do understand your application domain. We do not need computer scientists that don't understand the application domain. Yeah, this is again something that's of course super important for data science. And so my take-home learning experiences was to take lots of biology classes at both of these places. Fantastic, right? Because in Berkeley and then MIT, you have the people teaching classes that wrote the textbooks. And that was just awesome to just sit in, even as a postdoc then, as a student and as a postdoc later on, and just listen to basic genetics and developmental and cell biology courses, which I was still missing, right? I had biology as a minor, just sort of molecular biology, but not, of course, the whole area of applications that would become relevant later. And so this is definitely something important to always keep training here, be it in the application domain or in the actual quantitative domain, if you want to call it that. And so that then brought me to apply in the US, because one of my friends actually said, are you crazy? Why would you go back to Europe? Research and interdisciplinary research is better established. The career tracks for academic researchers are much more established in the States. If you get a professorship, a tenure track professorship, as it's called in the States, at one of the places like this, like at Duke University, don't go back to Germany to some like 3-year-long contract and you don't know what will come next. And that was definitely also good advice. And I'm glad that this was actually the student who I worked first with when I arrived at Berkeley. And this person has had a lot of influence on my life and pushing me in the right directions when I wasn't quite sure which path to take. And so I stayed in the US actually for a total of more than 10 years. In the end, I think it was something like 12 years in 3 different cities, in the Bay Area, in Boston, and then in North Carolina here at Duke. And the good things was here to understand how important different career options are, and that you have clear career options. That's often difficult in interdisciplinary research, that you have a defined path. You often have to find your own path here because it's not an established field and people are stuck to a certain degree in their established fields. And you need to find places where there is interdisciplinary education or a willingness of people to listen to the other side. And for what it's worth, especially since 2016, Germany sounds, very much the promised land compared to the US, and has made my return to Germany much easier. But some things in the way research is run in the States is simply less complicated and a bit more organized maybe than in Germany, actually. Germany has other advantages like stable funding and so forth and other things, but in sort of forward-thinking places like Berkeley and MIT, their reputation doesn't come from nowhere, right? I mean, it is great to go to these places and take something with them. And so to finish up here, this is where we are now. We're in Berlin. And the building on the left is the place at the Institute. I mentioned I work at the Max Delbrueck Center. So this is the Berlin Institute for Medical Systems Biology in Mitte in Berlin, where actually my lab is now on the first floor. And on the right is actually the Institute, Integrative Research Institute for Life Sciences of Humboldt University. That's my foot in the biology department there, where I also run another graduate program. So I'm actually co-directing 2 different graduate programs. Graduate education in this interdisciplinary domain is something that's dear to my heart. And so I have one that's more biology leaning at the university and one that's more data science leaning through the Max Delbrueck Center. And so what are we doing there? Maybe I can take 1 minute to tell you what we're actually doing in terms of research. We want to understand how gene regulation works, and that is essentially to understand the switches of the genes in the genome. You could, like I sometimes use the analogy that we are in a house and we now know where the light switches are and we know where the lamps are, but what we do need to understand is which lamp actually switches on which light, right? So the lights are the genes, the lamps are these switches, regulatory regions in the genome that encode complicated circuits of gene regulation so that different cells can actually perform different functions. And so, like I always need to say, it's like if you find out that your the fridge in the light in your fridge comes on when you press 3 buttons, light switches in 3 different rooms, and then the light comes on between 12 and 11 or 12 and 1 in the morning in your fridge. That's kind of the genome. You have complicated switches, complicated circuits wiring the switches to the genes and performing different functions. And we do this in basic research where we try to decode the genome. So we build deep neural networks by now to take input genome information, the famous 4 letters A, C, G, U in RNA, not T, right? And actually make predictions that allow us, not to go too deeply, to effectively weight where important letters are in the genome, to essentially have the networks tell us where are specific sequence patterns that perform specific functions. That's why you see shared sequence patterns here, similar looking patterns in these different genomic sequences, because there are similar things happening at that spot in the genome. And another thing, and this is sometimes really closely connected to practical research, because we're also still grappling with the question of what actually a gene is. And so we're working with researchers, in this case in Lausanne, in the context of cancer immune therapy, because cancer cells make different parts. They are aberrant, they divide differently, they proliferate like crazy, but they also produce pieces, different pieces than your normal cell that your immune system might recognize. And with our algorithms and tools, we can analyze these cancer cells to tell our collaborators what are the different bits and pieces that the cell makes, which are not from traditional genes, actually, from other parts in the genome, but they suddenly get made by cancer cells, because that might be useful to train your own immune system to fight these cancer cells. And so certainly the algorithms that we developed have really practical use. And that's really the fascinating thing that drives me in this area of research, that you really don't know. You work in very basic sciences, and you really don't know where your impact's gonna be. You work in it because you like solving problems and you like interacting with all kinds of different people, and then suddenly you find application areas that are really fascinating and in areas that you didn't even expect.
Amazing. Uwe, you would get some standing ovation of a large crowd by now, but you can just imagine that. Thank you so much for this introduction. I mean, I've been familiar with your CV, but it's always really, really impressive to see your work, especially your focus on apply solid methods, and then you can find great answers in all kinds of fields. So I would love to invite everybody to make use of the chat, because we have still 5 more minutes. That gives us room for 2 or 3 questions. But while we sort out the most important questions from the chat, Uwe, can you bring us in touch with the hybrid school for just a very, very brief? I mean, that's some interdisciplinary thing going on in Berlin as well, right?
Yeah, so the Helmholtz Association actually started several graduate schools for data sciences together with different university partners in major German cities, right? So this is in Heidelberg, in Munich, in Berlin, in Hamburg, in different places. And the idea there is that we, as Helmholtz institutes, which cover all different sciences, many natural sciences, but also others, to team up with our colleagues from university, from the traditional quantitative departments, from computer science, from statistics, and so forth, to actually have our students co-advised then by application specialists and by computer scientists. Because like I pointed out, it's very important to get this training and this fundamental understanding in application areas. And you can be a data scientist that works in different application domains and jumps, and that works to a certain degree, but I found it more fulfilling, but that's personal taste, to say I really delve deeply in one specific area that also I find fascinating and choose that as application domain. And so here the students will work in specific application domains, like in astrophysics in Berlin, for instance. Our students work in astrophysics, in geosciences, and medical sciences, and so forth. And they actually meet and exchange knowledge and get trained in this intersecting data science, in the concepts, in the quantitative models, because they will over and over be relevant in different application domains. And so,
all right. Thank you for introducing that school. Everybody in the fair, the conference fair, there's a booth of the hybrid school where you can get further information. Also, there's a booth of the Max Delbrueck Center where Uwe is located, and you can check out their programs as well. So Uwe, we have a lot of questions in the chat coming from chemical engineers or biologists who basically took the career path in a different way, and they want to ask whether they could join your programs, just in general speaking, coming from the domain side and to getting to know how to apply the data science on their domain knowledge. Would that be a suitable career path as well?
Absolutely. I think for me, I mean, there's different options in different places, but for me, if you are in a country that has a separate bachelor, master, and then computer science, and then PhD degree program, if you don't come from computer science, the master's would be a right place, for instance, to get that knowledge. So if you had, it's actually a really excellent combination. If you did a bachelor's in an application domain, and then a master's in the connection, either in data science now or in this interdisciplinary computer science programs like bioinformatics or like geoinformatics, or these kind of things, to actually get really exposure from both sides. So you can do this in either way around. But also then in the States, for instance, where you typically have a bachelor and then you start your PhD, you could look for a PhD program that actually offers you to get up to speed. They will be different. Some will expect you to have all the statistics already in place. Others will not, so you need to do a little bit of groundwork if you can enter there straight from a bachelor's, or if you do another master's. I, for instance, have now a PhD student who did 2 master degrees, because she did one first in biochemistry, and then realized, no, the computational stuff is really good, and she bit the bullet and did a second master's, really focused in bioinformatics before she started as a PhD student now. Yeah.
Amazing. It sounds like you have to be like a full-on genius to work with you, with the greatest people. But we have
just the right passion and the right interests and motivation.
We have one more rather personal question here, Victoria.
Yeah, we have one last question from the crowd outside, and it's from Felix. And Felix is asking, do you believe it is more important to pursue a topic position you are passionate for to take a PhD position, to not be without work for a long time?
Wait, I didn't quite acoustically understand it. Do you
believe it is more important to pursue a position you're passionate about, or to wait longer, until you find something that is really fitting? Or
well, if you're in the sciences, and if you're working towards a PhD, I think you do need to be passionate about your research. There's no way around this, right? You are working a lot on your own, right? I mean, research is something that you do ultimately. You work a lot on your own, even if it's interactive and so forth. And to get through the hard times, you do really need motivation and passion for this work. And you'd rather wait some time, let's say, maybe not 10 years, but some time to find the right match, or then to see, well, you can get some other education, some other courses to put you on that path. And I've had people, for instance, in my group 2 that came from a different place, actually did just intern for some time or had a small job, were still enrolled as students, there's different options to do this, but to get a taste for whether this is the right direction before then you do this full on, for instance. Yeah, but overall, yes, I think it's good to make sure you like what you're doing. And I found always, I had a few colleagues that at some point managed to see that this is not for them. And then it really depends how far you are along. If you're far along, just keep trucking through, you'll finish and it's fine. And it's going to be better. But if you realize after half a year or a year, the PhD is not for you, or this is the wrong position. I've also had several people in my group that started a PhD somewhere else and then transferred, right? There's nothing wrong with changing path. And this is what I meant in my CV. It looks sort of bizarrely straight, but this absolutely doesn't have to be that way. And it was, for me, it was always sort of last minute, somebody else shoved me back in the right track, and I would have gone somewhere else and made much bigger detours. And I just had other people tell me, maybe you want to do this, and I listened, and it turned out to be one decent, good choice.
Uwe Ohler, ladies and gentlemen, making a passionate case about being passionate about science. Uwe, we would love to hear from you for another hour or even longer, but I'm on a very, very tight schedule with people coming in just 3 minutes. So let me thank you again. It was a great pleasure for us to have you in this nice virtual career fair. Everybody will reconvene in 3 minutes. You have to sign in again for the next panel, which is Career in Data Science, Earth, Environment, and Matter. Looking forward to seeing you. Thank you again, Uwe. Talk to you soon, and see all you guys later in 3 minutes.
Get in touch if you have questions. Absolutely. You know where to find me, I'm sure, or at least you can find me for sure.
Find the MDC and the hybrid school in the fair later on. Bye-bye.